Okay, we're reading Mask of the Red Death on page 84. There are a lot of big words, so you should follow along so you can see what's going on. We're only going to read part of the story today, and then when we are done with today, you guys will have an assignment to do. Pay attention, follow along so that you know what's going on. Of course, it's me, so I'm going to stop and explain some stuff. Just write it out so that you can do your assignment. The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. The Red Death had long devastated the country. Okay, what's Red Death? What was that? It was a plague. It was a plague. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar. When you have an avatar, what do you have?
Profile picture.
It's a picture that shows like something about you. It's a picture that shows something about you. So they're saying if something really showed itself, if something really stood for it, the Red Death, it was blood. So it's like a bloody, disgusting disease. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. So, you are in pain, there's blood comes out of your pores, and then you die. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and the sympathy of his fellow man. It's really, really contagious. And so if you see someone with it, like they're bleeding out of all their pores, you don't want to hang out with them. So no one's helping you and you have the Red Death, they're running away from you. And the whole seizure process and termination of the disease were the incidents of a half of an hour. So how long does it take once you get it till you die?
30 minutes.
30 minutes, which is a pretty sweet deal, because you don't want to like slowly die for like 10 years, right? You get it, you bleed out your pores, you die. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned a presence of 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. So he's living in a castle that like it probably has a moat, it has really tall stuff around it so that you can't get to him because he does not want the Red Death. Because he's also wanted to have a big party, you'll see. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. The wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses or despair or to the frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatory, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was a beauty, there was wine. All these and the security were within, without the Red Death. So, the prince has set all this up. You can't walk in, you can't walk out, but he has everything that you need. So before he lets you in, surely he's testing you to make sure you don't have the Red Death because he doesn't want people to have the Red Death. But once you're in, you can't leave because he doesn't want to open the door and let like germs in. Are you all with me so far? You know what's going on.
So basically he's a germaphobe.
Well, he's a germaphobe, but like, of course he's a germaphobe because...
At this point, yeah, because if he's not a germaphobe, he's going to die.
Right. You don't want the Red Death because then you have 30 minutes until you bleed out your pores and die. Yeah, not fun. I mean, maybe, I don't know. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged and most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of most unusual magnificence. How long have they been living here? How long? 6 months, 5 or 6 months. Is the illness going away outside of the castle? No. It was a voluptuous scene, the masquerade. But first let me tell you of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bazaar. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than at one time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and each turn had a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. So, you're going through these 7 rooms, and it's almost like a maze. Like, you go a little bit, it turns, you go a little bit, it turns, you go a little bit, it turns, okay? And they keep talking about how his tastes are bizarre. He likes some kind of, not weird stuff, like you're going to start thinking of weird stuff, but weird stuff in that, just odd, like Gothic and old and odd. Yeah? Let's go. You have a question? Yeah. Okay. Yes. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. So now we're walking through these rooms, and the first room you go into is all blue, and its window is blue, so any light that comes in is shaded blue. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and the panes here were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon the carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabra amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro and depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from the lamp or the candle within the suite of chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood opposite to each window a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminated the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, and the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. So you walk through the 7 chambers, and they go blue, purple, green, orange, white, violet, and then black, and everything in the black room is black or red. So it's like a little bit morbid and a little bit gross. Yeah. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. What color is ebony?
Black.
Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of a clock and sound, which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of oh so a peculiar note and emphasis that, at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance, to hearken their sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole company, and while the chimes of the clock yet rang, and observed in the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and the sedate passed their hands over the brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. So every hour what happens? Yeah, a clock makes a super loud noise. And it makes the people who are playing the music stop, and it makes the people who are dancing stop, and then they all have to start over. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly, and the musicians looked at each other and smiled as if their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of clocks should produce in them no similar emotion. And then after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and there were the same disconcert and the tremulous meditation as before. Okay, so every hour they're like, next hour this isn't going to scare us, we aren't going to be freaked out by the clock, and every hour they get freaked out again. Oh, good for you. Okay, this is where we're going to stop for today, and now you should do your assignment.